heavy. My first cousin passed away from a heart attack. The reason was financial pressure and also the harshness of his wife's behavior. He died alone. His wife was at his brother's house. This is a painful reminder for all of us. Life is given only once. Please don't take tension to the point that it destroys your health. Be gentle, be polite, and try to understand each other. Love your partner, love your children, and love your family. Money will come and go, but respect and kindness keep a home alive. I am sharing this because you are my family too, and I don't want anyone among us to suffer the same pain. If your heart is true, right, present. If your love is real, right. I am with Mr. Peter. Some love stories begin with a single glance that rewrites destiny. This one began with a book that neither would ever finish reading because they became too busy writing their own story instead. Agneta Esti balanced on her tiptoes, fingertips barely grazing, Pride and Prejudice on Hartwell University's highest shelf. Golden autumn sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting her dark skin in warm amber, while her natural hair escaped its careful bun in soft curls. "Allow me." The voice carried warmth and gentle amusement. Agneta turned to find herself looking into eyes the color of a winter sky, grey-blue and intense, belonging to a man whose sandy hair looked perpetually tousled from studying. Jack Matthew stood behind her, tall and lean, in his simple white shirt and dark jeans. Nothing about his appearance screamed wealth, though Agneta knew the Matthew name graced half the buildings on campus. "I can manage," she replied softly, heat rising in her cheeks. Experience had taught her wariness around boys like Jack, those born to privilege, whose futures were mapped in boardrooms. His smile transformed his entire face, crinkling his eyes with genuine warmth rather than smug superiority. "I'm sure you can, but I was raised to help beautiful women reach impossible things." Without waiting for permission, he stretched over her, his chest barely brushing her shoulder as he retrieved the book. His cologne was subtle, expensive but not overwhelming, and the brief contact sent electricity shooting through her entire body. "Jane Austen," he observed, offering the book with a theatrical flourish. "Excellent choice. Though I should warn you, Mr. Darcy sets impossibly high standards for us mere mortals." Their fingers touched during the exchange, and Agneta watched his eyes widen as the same shock of connection hit him. "Thank you," she managed. "Jack," he said, extending his hand formally. "Jack Matthew." "Agneta." She placed her hand in his, surprised by the roughness of his palm. Unexpected calluses that spoke of work beyond textbooks. "Agneta," he repeated, testing her name like fine wine. "Latin for pure, isn't it?" Her eyebrows rose. Most people butchered her pronunciation or ignored its meaning entirely. "You study classical languages?" "Minor in classical studies," Jack admitted with self-deprecating humor. "Completely useless in the real world, but occasionally impressive in libraries." Despite every warning instinct, Agneta laughed, a musical sound that made Jack's chest tighten with unexpected longing. He'd dated sophisticated girls from families like his own, but none had ever made him feel this immediate sense of recognition. "What's your major?" Jack asked, genuinely curious rather than making conversation. "Literature and education," Agneta said, unconsciously clutching the book against her chest. "I want to teach children that reading can transport them anywhere, that stories have the power to change everything." "That's incredible." Jack's admiration was evident. "The world needs teachers who inspire rather than simply instruct." They stood surrounded by centuries of human knowledge, but all either could focus on was the other person. Agneta found herself studying the strong line of his jaw, the intelligence that sparked in his eyes when she mentioned her passion. Jack couldn't stop noticing how the light caught golden undertones in her skin, the way her face illuminated when she spoke about teaching. "I should return to studying," Agneta said reluctantly, making no move to leave. "What are you working on?" Victorian literature essay, comparing social commentary between Austen and Dickens. Jack's expression brightened. Sounds fascinating and formidable. Agneta sighed. I've been staring at the same paragraph for an hour, trying to articulate how Austen's subtle irony achieves more social critique than Dickens's direct approach. You know, Jack said carefully, I wrote something similar last semester. Not claiming expertise, but maybe a fresh perspective would help? Agneta hesitated. She was accustomed to struggling alone, surviving on determination and endless coffee. Accepting help felt dangerous, especially from someone like Jack, but something in his expression wasn't pity or condescension, just genuine desire to help. I suppose different viewpoints couldn't hurt, she conceded. Perfect. There's a quiet study room upstairs. We could grab coffee and tackle your essay together. Walking through the library, Jack noticed other students staring. The Matthew air with a black girl was apparently newsworthy. Agneta's shoulders tensed as they passed a cluster of sorority girls who made no effort to hide their shocked expressions. But Jack seemed either oblivious to the attention or completely indifferent. He held doors, asked about her favorite authors, and listened intently when she explained her thesis. For 2 hours, they worked together. Jack's insights were thoughtful and intelligent, his questions pushing her to examine arguments from new angles. He never condescended or acted superior. Instead, he asked genuine questions that helped clarify her own thoughts. You're brilliant, Jack said suddenly after Agneta delivered a particularly insightful analysis. The way you connect social structure with narrative technique, it's extraordinary. Heat flooded Agneta's cheeks. I just read extensively. No, it's far more than that. You understand not just what authors say, but why they chose specific methods to say it. That's natural talent, not something learned from books. The admiration in his voice made Agneta's heart race. There was something deeper in his expression, not just intellectual respect, but genuine attraction that made her feel both beautiful and brilliant. Thank you, she said softly, for helping with the essay and for making me feel intelligent instead of inadequate. Anyone who makes you feel inadequate is an idiot, Jack said fiercely. You're one of the most intelligent people I've ever encountered. Their eyes met across the small table, and Agneta felt that electric connection intensify. Jack leaned forward slightly, drawn by invisible force, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her right there. Instead, he reached for her copy of Pride and Prejudice, opening it to the title page. Taking a pen from his bag, he wrote something in neat handwriting before returning the book. My number, he explained, cheeks slightly pink. In case you need help with more Victorian literature, or if you want to debate whether Mr. Darcy truly deserves Elizabeth or if she's too good for him. Agneta looked down at elegant script. For Elizabeth Bennet herself, a woman who knows her own worth. Jack Matthew, 5550147. Elizabeth Bennet, she asked, smiling despite herself. Beautiful, intelligent, sees through people's pretenses to their true character, and refuses to let society dictate who she should love, Jack said seriously. If that's not you, I don't know who is. Agneta felt her heart flutter dangerously. No one had ever compared her to her favorite literary heroine with such genuine admiration. And I suppose that makes you Mr. Darcy. I can only hope to be half as worthy, Jack replied earnestly, though I promise I'm working on being less proud and more humble. As they packed up, Agneta couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The man walking beside her wasn't just Jack Matthew, heir to fortune. He was intelligent, kind, and genuinely interested in who she was as a person. Same time tomorrow? Jack asked hopefully as they reached the library entrance. I'll be here, Agneta promised, clutching her book with his number written inside. Walking across campus, Agneta couldn't stop smiling. Behind her, Jack stood in the doorway watching until she disappeared, already counting hours until he could see her again. Neither knew this moment. This simple exchange of a book and phone number would change everything. They had begun a love story that would soar to incredible heights before crashing in devastating betrayal, only to rise again in ways neither could imagine. All they knew was that something beautiful had begun in that library, surrounded by love stories written by people long dead, and tomorrow couldn't arrive soon enough. Chapter 2. Dancing in the Rain. True love reveals itself not in perfect moments, but in the spaces between heartbeats. When two souls recognize each other in the chaos of an ordinary Tuesday that transforms into something magical. 3 weeks had passed since their library encounter, and Jack Matthew had never been so wonderfully distracted from his studies. Every morning brought him past the literature building, hoping for glimpses of Agneta. Every afternoon found him inventing reasons to visit the library, though he rarely gathered courage to approach when she was clearly focused. Their text conversations had evolved from tentative Victorian literature questions into discussions spanning childhood dreams to favorite films. Agneta had been surprised by his thoughtfulness, how he remembered small details and asked follow-up questions, proving he genuinely listened. "Coffee after comparative lit today," Jack texted that Tuesday morning, his hands actually trembling as he awaited her response. "I'd like that," came her reply, followed by a small heart emoji that made Jack grin like an idiot during finance lecture. They met at The Daily Grind, a cozy campus cafe serving overpriced coffee to undergraduates too young to know better. Jack arrived first, claiming a window table and checking his reflection repeatedly in his phone screen. He'd changed shirts 3 times before settling on a navy sweater that brought out his eyes. When Agneta entered, Jack's breath caught. She wore a deep purple sweater complementing her skin beautifully, natural hair loose in soft curls catching the light. When she smiled across the cafe, Jack felt like the luckiest man alive. "Sorry I'm late," Agneta said, sliding into the opposite seat. "Professor Williams kept us overtime discussing Wuthering Heights symbolism." "No problem at all," Jack said, standing to pull out her chair despite her already sitting. The gesture made her smile. "How did the discussion go?" "Fascinating, actually. We analyzed whether Heathcliff's love for Catherine is romantic or destructive, and I argued it's both, that the most powerful emotions often contain seeds of their own destruction." Jack studied her face as she spoke, noting how her eyes illuminated when discussing literature. "That's beautifully put. Love as both creation and destruction." "What about you?" Agneta asked, sipping her coffee. "Any earth-shattering finance revelations?" Jack laughed. "Unless you consider efficient market hypothesis earth-shattering, then no. Although I spent most of the lecture thinking about yesterday's conversation regarding whether Mr. Rochester deserves Jane Eyre." "And your conclusion?" "That you were right, he doesn't deserve her, but that's not the point. Love isn't about deserving someone, it's about choosing them daily, despite flaws and imperfections." Agneta felt her heart skip. The way Jack looked at her suggested he was discussing more than fictional characters. Conversation flowed effortlessly between academic topics and personal stories. Agneta shared tales of growing up in small-town Georgia, her mother working 3 jobs to fund her education, dreams of opening reading programs for underprivileged children. Jack revealed travel experiences with his family, but also feelings of isolation due to wealth, teachers treating him differently because of his surname. "Sometimes I feel like people see the bank account before seeing me," Jack confessed, "like I'm not a real person, just a collection of assets and expectations." "I see you," Agneta said softly, sincerity in her voice making Jack's heart clench. "I see someone who helps strangers reach books, who spends free time reading Victorian literature to better understand a girl he barely knows, who cares more about children's education than profit margins." Jack reached across the table, taking her hand as their fingers intertwined naturally. "And I see someone brilliant and compassionate and beautiful, who works harder than anyone I know while still finding time to care about fictional characters from centuries past." They sat holding hands across the small table, surrounded by conversation buzz and espresso machine hisses, feeling like the only two people in existence. The connection between them was undeniable now, crackling like electricity in the space between them. Thunder rumbled overhead, interrupting their perfect moment. Both looked up at windows, surprised to see dark clouds gathering in what had been clear sky an hour before. "Looks like rain," Agneta observed, though neither moved to leave. "We could wait it out," Jack suggested hopefully. But as if the universe had other plans, cafe lights flickered and the manager announced early closure due to power outages affecting the entire block. Students gathered belongings, most pulling out umbrellas or calling friends for rides. "I don't suppose you have an umbrella?" Agneta asked, eyeing the increasingly heavy rain. "No, but I have something better," Jack said, standing and removing his jacket. "I have a jacket and absolutely no concern about getting soaked." "Jack, no, you'll catch pneumonia." But he was already wrapping his jacket around both of them, pulling her close to his side. "Trust me." Agneta looked up at mischievous glints in his winter blue eyes, at hair already dampening from moisture in the air. "You're insane." "Insane about you," he said, and before she could respond, he was pulling her into the rain. The storm had intensified during their conversation, transforming from light drizzle into proper downpour. Within seconds, they were both drenched despite Jack's jacket, hair plastered to heads and water streaming down faces. But instead of misery, they found themselves laughing like children. "This is crazy," Agneta shouted over the rain sound, grinning as she said it. "This is perfect," Jack called back, spinning her around on the empty sidewalk. They ran across campus together, splashing through puddles and slipping on wet leaves, Jack's arm around Agneta's waist for stability. Every few steps, one would stumble, and both would dissolve into laughter, clinging to each other for support. Reaching Agneta's dormitory completely drenched and shivering, neither wanted the moment to end. They stood under the small overhang, suddenly aware of their proximity, how wet clothes clung to bodies, how Jack's hand still rested on the small of her back. "You're trembling," Jack said softly, his thumb tracing gentle circles through her soaked sweater. "So are you," Agneta whispered, looking up at him. Water droplets clung to his eyelashes, and his usually perfect hair was a mess of wet waves. He'd never looked more handsome. "Agneta," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. His free hand cupped her face, thumb brushing raindrops from her cheek. "I need you to know something." "What?" she breathed, heart racing. "I'm falling for you, hard. I know this is crazy. We've only known each other 3 weeks, but I can't stop thinking about you. You're my first thought waking up, my last thought falling asleep. Right now, standing here soaked and freezing, I've never been happier." Agneta felt tears mixing with rainwater on her cheeks. Jack ... "I know I'm not supposed to feel this way so quickly," he continued, his forehead resting against hers. "I know there are countless reasons why this is complicated, our different backgrounds, what people will say, but none of that matters when I look at you. Nothing matters except this feeling, like I've waited my entire life to find you." "I'm falling for you too," Agneta whispered, her hands fisting in his wet shirt. "It terrifies me, but I can't fight it anymore. You make me feel like anything is possible." Jack's smile was radiant even in the stormy afternoon's dim light. "Really?" "Really," she confirmed, and then his lips were on hers. The kiss was everything their first kiss should be, desperate and tender, passionate and sweet. Jack's hands tangled in her wet hair while Agneta's arms wrapped around his neck, pulling him closer. They kissed like drowning people finding air, like the storm around them was nothing compared to the storm they created between themselves. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jack rested his forehead against hers again. "I should probably let you get inside before you actually catch pneumonia." "Probably," Agneta agreed, making no move to step away. "Dinner tomorrow?" Jack asked hopefully. "I'd love that," Agneta said, then stood on tiptoes to kiss him again, soft and sweet this time. As she disappeared into her dormitory, Jack stood in the rain several more minutes, grinning like an idiot and not caring about getting soaked. He had kissed Agneta Esti. She was falling for him too. Somewhere between the library and this perfect storm, he'd found something he hadn't known he was seeking. Walking back to his dorm, Jack pulled out his phone to text his roommate about being the happiest man alive. But he stopped, realizing some moments were too perfect to share, too precious for words. Instead, he walked through rain, replaying every second of their kiss, already planning how he would court this incredible woman who had turned his world upside down with nothing more than a smile and love of Victorian literature. Behind him, Agneta watched from her window as his figure disappeared into the storm, fingers pressed to lips where she could still feel his kiss's warmth. She had never believed in fairy tales, but standing there in wet clothes with racing heart, she thought maybe, just maybe, she was living in one. Chapter 3. Against the world, love demands courage to stand against the world. To choose each other when choosing each other costs everything, and to build a future with nothing but hope and determination as foundation stones. The Matthew family estate sprawled across 30 acres of manicured perfection, a monument to old money and older prejudices. Jack had dreaded this moment for 2 months, but he couldn't avoid the inevitable forever. "Are you certain about this?" Agneta asked as Jack's BMW entered the circular driveway. She wore a conservative navy dress, though she couldn't shake the feeling nothing would be perfect enough for this moment. "I'm certain about you," Jack said firmly, taking her hand. "That's all that matters." But approaching the imposing front door, Jack felt his stomach churn. He'd prepared his family as much as possible, emphasizing Agneta's intelligence and achievements. What he hadn't mentioned was her race, hoping character would speak for itself before prejudices took hold. He should have known better. Margaret Matthew answered the door herself, silver hair perfectly styled. Jack's mother had always been beautiful in a cold, untouchable way, but the expression crossing her face upon seeing Agneta could have frozen flame. "Mother," Jack said, his voice carefully controlled, "I'd like you to meet Agneta Esti." "Mrs. Matthew," Agneta said politely, extending her hand. "Thank you for having me. Your home is beautiful." Margaret stared at the outstretched hand as if it might bite, her face cycling through surprise, disgust, something resembling panic. She did not take the offered hand. "I see," Margaret said finally, her voice arctic. "Well, come in, I suppose." The dinner that followed ranked among the most uncomfortable experiences of Jack's life. His father, Robert Matthew, barely concealed displeasure behind questions seeming innocent but carrying clear undertones. "So, Agneta," Robert said, cutting prime rib with surgical precision, "what do your parents do?" "My mother is a nurse at County Hospital. My father passed when I was young." "You're here on scholarship, I assume?" "Yes, sir. Academic merit scholarship." "How commendable," Margaret interjected, though her tone suggested otherwise. "It must be so difficult, coming from that background, trying to fit in at a place like Hartwell." Jack's hands clenched around his fork. "Agneta has the highest GPA in her major, mother." His sister Caroline chose that moment to speak. "Jack tells us you're studying literature. I suppose that's a nice hobby, though not very practical for someone in your situation." "Literature isn't a hobby for me," Agneta said quietly. "It's my passion. I want to teach children that education is the pathway to changing circumstances." "How admirable," Robert said dismissively, "though I'm sure you understand Jack's future involves certain expectations, responsibilities requiring a partner who can navigate particular social circles. The implication hung heavy like smoke. Jack felt something snap inside him. "What exactly are you trying to say, Dad?" Jack asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Margaret set down her wineglass with sharp clink. "Jackson, surely you can't be serious about this girl." "This girl," Jack said, standing abruptly, "has a name. Her name is Agneta, and she's twice as intelligent as anyone at this table. She's kind, compassionate, hard-working, and makes me happier than I've ever been." "Jackson," Margaret began, "you people are insulting the woman I love because of her skin color while pretending to be civilized. At least have courage to own your racism instead of hiding behind coded language." Margaret gasped audibly. "How dare you speak to us this way?" Robert's face reddened with anger. "If you continue down this path, Jackson, there will be consequences. The family business, your trust fund, your future, all depends on making sensible choices." Jack looked around the table, at his mother's cold disapproval, his father's barely contained rage, his sister's uncomfortable silence. Then he looked at Agneta, sitting perfectly still, dignity intact despite the cruelty directed at her. "Then I guess I'll build my own future," Jack said calmly, "because Agneta isn't going anywhere." Margaret actually fainted then, slumping forward as Caroline rushed to her aid. Robert began shouting about family loyalty, his voice echoing through the dining room, but Jack was already helping Agneta to her feet, guiding her toward the door. "We're leaving," he announced to the chaos behind them. They drove in silence, Jack's hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. Finally, Agneta spoke. "Pull over," she said softly. He pulled into an empty parking lot, and as soon as the car stopped, Agneta began crying, deep, wrenching sobs from somewhere broken inside her. "I can't do this to you," she gasped. "I can't be the reason you lose your family, your future, everything." "Agneta, look at me," Jack said firmly, taking her face in his hands. She met his eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You are not taking anything from me," Jack said fiercely. "They are. They're choosing hate over love. If that's their choice, then I choose you. I choose us. I choose love. But your trust fund, your family's business, I don't want their money if it comes with conditions about who I can love," Jack interrupted. "I'd rather be poor with you than rich without you." "Jack, you don't understand. You've never been poor." "Then teach me," Jack said simply. "We'll figure it out together. None of that matters as long as we're together." Agneta stared at him, seeing absolute sincerity in his eyes. "You really mean that?" "I've never meant anything more." They moved in together the following week to a tiny one-bedroom apartment above a bakery. The place was far from Jack's family estate. Floors creaked, heating was unreliable, and the shower had exactly two settings, scalding or freezing. Jack had never been happier. He got construction work with a crew that didn't care about his surname. His soft hands developed calluses, pale skin bronzed from sun exposure, and his body grew lean and strong from physical labor. Agneta worked at the campus tutoring center and taught reading programs at the community center. Between their wages, they could afford rent, groceries, and textbooks. Barely, but they managed. Their tiny apartment became a sanctuary filled with second-hand furniture, books stacked everywhere, and love so tangible it warmed rooms better than their temperamental heating. They cooked pasta dinners by candlelight, not for romance, but to save on electric bills. And they made love with passion, growing stronger daily. In their second-hand bed, Jack worshipped Agneta's body until she cried out his name like a prayer. Agneta loved him with equal fervor, driving him to pleasure heights he hadn't known existed. "I love you," Jack whispered one night after they'd made love intensely. "I love you more than I thought possible." "I love you too," Agneta replied, fingers tracing patterns on his chest. even when it scares me. How much?" 6 months later, Jack used his last savings to buy a ring, a simple silver band engraved with "Forever Yours" in elegant script. He proposed on a Thursday evening while they cooked dinner, dropping to one knee in their tiny kitchen. "Agneta Esti," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "you are the most incredible woman I've ever known. You're brilliant and beautiful and brave, and you make me want to be better than I ever imagined possible. I can't offer luxury or security, but I can offer my heart, my loyalty, and my promise to love you fiercely for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" Agneta looked down at this man who had sacrificed everything to be with her. She saw calluses on his hands, hope and vulnerability in his winter-blue eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." "Of course, yes." Jack slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. They kissed in their kitchen, surrounded by pasta sauce aromas and their ancient refrigerators humming, and it was more romantic than any grand gesture could have been. That night, they made love with desperation and joy, leaving them both breathless. This was their life, imperfect, difficult, but completely theirs. They had chosen each other against all odds, and that choice had created something beautiful and unbreakable. As Jack held Agneta afterward, he thought about his family's empty mansion. He didn't miss it. He didn't miss the money or status or approval from people who valued wealth over character. What he had here, with this incredible woman, was worth more than everything he'd given up. They were building something real together, something that couldn't be bought or inherited or taken away. They were building love. And love, Jack was learning, was the only fortune that truly mattered. Chapter 4. The Perfect Wedding. Some weddings are about spectacle and status, but the most beautiful ceremonies are those where love itself provides all decoration needed, where two souls bind themselves together not with gold and diamonds, but with promises shining brighter than any jewel ever could. Morning sun streamed through the small bridal suite windows at Riverside Chapel, casting golden light across the simple white dress hanging on the closet door. Agneta sat before an antique vanity mirror while her mother, Zara, carefully pinned tiny white flowers into her natural hair, styled in elegant twists and curls. "You look like an angel, my daughter," Zara said softly, her Ethiopian accent still strong despite 30 years in America. Her dark hands worked gently, and her eyes shimmered with unshed tears of joy. Agneta studied her reflection, hardly recognizing herself. The dress, a simple but elegant A-line gown with delicate lace sleeves found at a consignment shop, fit perfectly. The white flowers in her hair came from Jack's small garden behind their apartment, picked fresh that morning with dew still clinging to petals. "I can't believe this day is finally here," Agneta whispered, touching the silver engagement ring, soon to be joined by a matching wedding band. "I can," said a warm voice from the doorway. Karen Abrams entered carrying a small bouquet of white roses and baby's breath, her blonde hair swept in an elegant chignon and her blue maid-of-honor dress flowing like water around her ankles. Karen had been Agneta's freshman year roommate and quickly became her closest friend. She was among the few who'd supported Agneta's relationship with Jack from the beginning, never showing even hints of the judgment others displayed. "You two have been inevitable since the day you met," Karen continued, handing Agneta the bouquet. "I've never seen two people more perfect for each other." "Thank you," Agneta said, squeezing her friend's hand. "For everything. For being here, for helping with planning, for never making me feel like this was crazy." "It's not crazy," Karen said firmly. "It's the sanest thing either of you has ever done." A soft knock interrupted them, and Agneta's Uncle Samuel peeked in. "Ladies, it's time." The ceremony was being held at Riverside Chapel, a small stone church nestled in an oak grove beside a gently flowing stream. It wasn't grand or fashionable, they couldn't afford grand or fashionable, but it was beautiful in its simplicity, with stained glass windows painting rainbow patterns on wooden pews and wildflowers blooming in the churchyard. Most guests were Agneta's family and friends, with a few of Jack's college buddies filling the groom's side. The Matthew family was notably absent. They'd made their position clear months ago and hadn't wavered. "Their loss," Jack had said, returning empty-handed from delivering their wedding invitation. "We don't need people who can't see how incredible you are." The music began, a simple piano arrangement of Canon in D, and chapel doors opened. Karen walked down the aisle first, steps measured and graceful, smile radiant as she took her place at the altar. Then it was Agneta's turn. The moment she appeared in the doorway, every person in the chapel seemed to gasp in unison. She was absolutely radiant, dark skin glowing against white dress, smile bright enough to power the entire building. But all Agneta could see was Jack. He stood at the altar in a simple black suit bought with overtime construction shift money, sandy hair neatly combed and winter blue eyes fixed on her with such intensity she felt her knees weaken. When he saw her, his face transformed, surprise giving way to awe, then to pure, overwhelming joy. Jack began to cry. He didn't try to hide it or wipe the tears away. He just stood there, completely overcome by the sight of the woman he loved walking toward him in her wedding dress, ready to become his wife. His best man, college roommate David, had to steady him with a hand on his shoulder. Agneta felt her own emotions threatening as she walked down the aisle on Uncle Samuel's arm, eyes locked with Jack's. Every step brought her closer to the man who'd chosen her over his family, his fortune, his entire previous life. Every step brought her closer to forever. When they reached the altar, Uncle Samuel placed Agneta's hand in Jack's, and the simple contact sent electricity shooting between them, just as it had that first day in the library. "You look," Jack whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You look like the most beautiful woman who ever lived." "You clean up pretty well yourself," Agneta whispered back, her thumb stroking over his knuckles. The ceremony was conducted by Pastor Williams, an elderly black minister who'd baptized Agneta as a child and flown in specifically to perform the wedding. His voice was warm and rich as he spoke about love, commitment, and the sacred bond they were about to enter. When time came for vows, Jack went first, his voice steady despite the emotion still flowing down his cheeks. "Agneta," he began, hands holding hers tightly, "6 months ago, I thought I knew what my life would look like. I thought success was measured in dollars and status, that love was something convenient happening between people from the same world. Then, you reached for that book in the library, and everything I thought I knew crumbled away." He paused, taking a shaky breath before continuing. "You taught me that real success is finding someone who makes you want to be better every single day. You taught me that love isn't convenient, it's revolutionary. It changes everything, demands everything, and gives everything in return. You saw past my name and money to the man I could become, and you loved that man even when he was still figuring out who he was." Jack's voice grew stronger, more certain. "I promise to choose you every day, not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. I promise to stand with you against anyone and everyone who doesn't understand what we have. I promise to work daily to deserve the incredible gift of your love. And I promise that no matter what challenges we face, no matter who tries to tear us apart, my heart will always be yours, forever and completely yours." By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. Even David was wiping his face with his pocket square. Agneta took a moment to compose herself before beginning her own vows, her voice clear and strong despite her emotion. "Jack," she said, squeezing his hands, "I used to think love stories only existed in books. I thought real life was too complicated, too harsh for the kind of love poets write about. Then you walked into my life and proved me wrong about everything." She smiled through her emotion, love for him shining in her eyes. "You didn't just fall in love with me, you fought for me. When your family rejected me, you chose me. When society questioned us, you defended us. When loving me cost you everything you'd been given, you decided to build something new with me instead. That kind of love, that kind of courage, that kind of devotion, that's not just romantic, it's heroic." Her voice grew passionate, filled with all the love she felt for this man who'd changed her entire world. "I promise to be worthy of the sacrifices you've made for us. I promise to love you with the same fierce devotion you've shown me. I promise to be your partner in building the life we've dreamed of, to support your ambitions as you've supported mine. And I promise that no matter how high we rise or how far we fall, you will always have my whole heart, my complete trust, and my unwavering faith in what we can accomplish together." Pastor Williams had to wait for sniffling and whispered amens to die down before continuing with the ring exchange. The bands were simple, white gold to match Agnetta's engagement ring, but engraved with their wedding date and "Forever Yours" that Jack had first written in her copy of Pride and Prejudice. "With this ring," Jack said, sliding the band onto Agnetta's finger, "I thee wed. My heart, my life, my everything, all yours." "With this ring," Agnetta replied, her hands trembling slightly as she placed Jack's ring on his finger. "I thee wed. Today, tomorrow, and always, completely yours." "By the power vested in me by the state and by God above," Pastor Williams declared, his voice booming through the small chapel, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jack, you may kiss your bride." Jack cupped Agnetta's face in his hands, thumbs wiping away her joyful tears, and kissed her with all the love, passion, and promise filling his heart. The kiss was soft and sweet at first, then deeper, more intense, as if they were sealing not just their vows, but their very souls together. The chapel erupted in cheers and applause as they broke apart, both laughing through their overwhelming happiness. Karen was openly crying, David was whistling, and Agnetta's family was clapping and calling out blessings in Amharic. As they walked back down the aisle together, hands clasped tightly, rice and flower petals raining down on them, Agnetta felt like she was floating. She was Mrs. Jack Matthew now, not because she'd taken his name, but because she'd taken his heart and given him hers in return. The reception was held in the church's fellowship hall, decorated with white lights and more flowers from Jack's garden. There was no expensive catering or elaborate cake, just homemade food prepared by Agnetta's aunts and a simple 2-layer cake Karen had baked herself. But there was music and dancing and so much joy that the small room seemed to expand to contain it all. Karen gave a maid of honor speech that moved everyone once again. "I've watched Agnetta and Jack together for almost 2 years now," Karen said, raising her champagne glass, "and I can honestly say I've never seen two people more meant for each other. They don't just love each other, they make each other better. They challenge each other, support each other, and face the world as a team. That's not just romance, that's partnership. That's the real thing." As the evening wound down and guests began leaving, Jack and Agnetta found themselves alone on the chapel steps, still in their wedding clothes, looking up at a sky full of stars. "Mrs. Matthew," Jack said, testing out the name with a grin. "Mr. Matthew," Agnetta replied, leaning into his side. "Any regrets?" Jack asked, though his tone was teasing. "Only one," Agnetta said seriously, and Jack's smile faltered until she continued. "I regret that we can't do this every day for the rest of our lives." Jack laughed, spinning her around on the chapel steps. "We'll just have to settle for being married every day for the rest of our lives." "I suppose I can live with that," Agnetta said, pulling him down for another kiss. As they drove away from the chapel in Jack's old BMW, decorated with tin cans and "Just Married" signs courtesy of David and Karen, they both felt like they were beginning the greatest adventure of their lives. They had faced opposition and overcome it. They had chosen love over convenience, each other over everything else. They were young, in love, and completely convinced that together they could conquer the world. If they had known what challenges lay ahead, what betrayals waited in their future, they might have held each other a little tighter that night. But perhaps it was better they didn't know. Perhaps it was better they had this perfect moment, this perfect day, this perfect beginning to store up against the darkness that would eventually come. For now, they were simply Jack and Agneta Matthew, driving toward their honeymoon cottage with their whole lives ahead of them, completely and utterly in love. And that was perfect enough. Chapter 5. The Distance Between Hearts. They say absence makes the heart grow fonder, but sometimes absence also makes the heart grow vulnerable, and in that vulnerability, love can either deepen into something unbreakable or crack wide enough for betrayal to slip through like poison in darkness. 5 years had passed since their wedding day, and Jack and Agneta Matthew had built something extraordinary together. Jack's construction experience had led to starting his own development company, specializing in affordable housing projects. Agneta had finished her master's degree and was running a literacy program gaining national recognition. Their tiny apartment above the bakery had been replaced by a modest but comfortable home with a garden where Jack grew the flowers he still brought Agneta every Friday. They were successful, happy, and more in love than ever, which made the news Agneta received on a Tuesday morning in March all the more devastating. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Matthew," Dr. Harrison said, kind eyes full of sympathy. "The tests confirm you have a rare autoimmune condition. It's not life-threatening, but requires specialized treatment only available at the research hospital in Melbourne." Agneta felt the world tilt. "How long?" "The treatment protocol is 5 months. Intensive therapy, close monitoring. I know it seems lengthy, but this is your best chance for complete recovery." That evening, Agneta sat in their kitchen staring at medical reports while Jack moved restlessly behind her, running his hands through his hair, his nervous habit when trying to solve impossible problems. 5 months, he said for the 10th time. 5 months in Australia. "It's not forever," Agneta said quietly, though her heart broke at the thought of separation. In 5 years of marriage, they'd never been apart longer than a week. Jack stopped moving and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "I'll come with you." "Jack, no. The business. I don't care about the business. I care about you. And I care about the life we've built together," Agneta said firmly. "This company is your dream, and you have 3 major projects starting in the next 6 months. I won't let my illness destroy what you've worked so hard to create." Jack's expression grew stubborn. "Then I'll fly back and forth. Every weekend, every break in treatment." "That would bankrupt us," Agneta pointed out. "Medical bills alone will be enormous, even with insurance." They sat in silence, both trying to find a non-existent solution. Finally, Jack spoke. "I hate this. I hate that you have to go through this alone." "I won't be completely alone," Agneta said, though the words felt hollow. "The treatment center has support groups and I'll make friends. It's not the same." "No," Agneta agreed, leaning her forehead against his. "It's not the same." 2 weeks later, they stood in the airport departure terminal, holding each other like drowning people. Agneta had tried being strong throughout preparations, but now, faced with the reality of leaving Jack for 5 months, her composure cracked. "I can't do this," she whispered against his chest. "I can't leave you." "Yes, you can," Jack said fiercely, though his own voice was thick with unshed emotion. "You're the strongest person I know. You can do anything." "Promise me," Agneta said desperately. "Promise you'll be here when I get back." "I promise," Jack replied without hesitation. "I promise I'll be here. I promise I'll wait. I promise nothing will change except that you'll be healthy again." Their final kiss was desperate and sweet, full of 5 years of love and promises of forever. When Agneta finally walked through security, she turned back to see Jack still standing there, hand pressed against the glass barrier, tears streaming down his face. The first month in Melbourne was exactly as difficult as both had expected. Treatment was exhausting and sometimes painful, leaving Agneta weak and homesick. But Jack kept his promises faithfully. He called every morning at 7 a.m. Melbourne time and every evening at 10 p.m. his time. He sent flowers every Monday and emails filled with photos from his day, business updates and declarations of love that made her cry happy tears. "I miss the way you hum when you're cooking," he told her during one video call. "I miss the way you steal covers and then deny it in your sleep," she replied, laughing despite the ache in her chest. "I miss everything about you," Jack said seriously. "The way you read 3 books at once, the way you argue with TV during cooking shows, the way you fit perfectly against my side when we're watching movies." "I miss being home," Agneta admitted. "I miss our life." During the second month, something shifted. Calls were still regular, but seemed shorter, more distracted. Jack's emails came less frequently, and when they did, they were filled with business updates rather than personal messages. When Agneta asked about it, Jack assured her he was just busy with a particularly challenging project. "Henderson Development is trying to underbid us on the Riverside contract," Jack explained during one call. "I'm working 18-hour days, trying to save the deal." "I'm sorry, baby," Agneta said. "I know how important that project is." "It's not your fault," Jack replied, but something in his voice seemed different, distant. It was around this time that Karen Abrams made her suggestion. Karen had remained close to both Jack and Agneta throughout their marriage, though she'd moved to New York after graduation for a marketing job. When she heard about Agneta's illness and treatment abroad, she immediately offered help. "I've been thinking," Karen said during one of her regular check-in calls with Agneta. "Jack is working himself to death, and that house must feel so empty without you. What if I took some vacation time and came to stay for a few weeks? I could help with household stuff. Maybe cook decent meals so he's not living on takeout." The suggestion made perfect sense. Karen was Agneta's best friend and had been maid of honor at their wedding. If anyone could be trusted to look after Jack while Agneta was away, it was her. "That's incredibly sweet," Agneta said, feeling a wave of gratitude. "But I couldn't ask you to use vacation time for that." "You're not asking, I'm offering," Karen replied. "Besides, I've been wanting to get out of New York for a while. The city is exhausting, and it would be nice to spend time somewhere quieter." When Agneta mentioned Karen's offer to Jack during their next call, he seemed hesitant. "I don't need a babysitter, Agneta. I can take care of myself." "I know you can," Agneta said gently. "But you're working too hard, and I worry about you being alone in that house. Karen could just stay in the guest room for a few weeks. Maybe cook actual food instead of whatever you're surviving on. If it would make you feel better, then okay. But just for a few weeks." Karen arrived 3 days later, bringing determination to be helpful that seemed genuine and intense. She immediately set about reorganizing the kitchen, stocking the refrigerator with fresh food, and establishing a routine of cooking elaborate dinners, waiting for Jack when he came home from work. "You don't have to do all this," Jack told her on her third night there, gesturing at the feast spread across their dining room table. "I enjoy cooking," Karen replied with a smile. "Besides, you work so hard. You deserve to come home to something nice." Jack felt a twinge of unease at her words, though he couldn't quite identify why. Karen was being helpful, exactly as Agneta had hoped. She kept the house clean, prepared delicious meals, and provided company during long evenings when the silence of Agneta's absence felt overwhelming. So why did her presence sometimes feel more like intrusion than comfort? "How is Agneta doing?" Karen asked during dinner that night. "Good," Jack replied automatically. "Treatment is going well. She's tired, but optimistic." "It must be so hard for her, being alone in a foreign country while she's sick," Karen said sympathetically. "And hard for you too, being here without her." "We're managing," Jack said, though the words felt hollow. "Still, 5 months is such a long time," Karen continued. "Relationships can be so fragile when distance is involved. People change, grow apart." Jack looked up sharply. "Agneta and I aren't going to grow apart." "Of course not," Karen said quickly, her expression innocent. "I just meant that it must be lonely for both of you." That night, Jack called Agneta at their usual time, but the conversation felt strained. When she asked about his day, he found himself mentioning everything except Karen's presence in their home. When she told him about her progress with treatment, he listened with only half his attention, distracted by the sound of Karen moving around in their kitchen. "Jack?" Agneta's voice brought him back to the conversation. "You seem distracted tonight." "Sorry," Jack said, forcing himself to focus on his wife's pixelated face on the screen. "Just tired. Long day at work." "Maybe you should get some sleep," Agneta suggested, though disappointment flickered across her features. "We can talk longer tomorrow." "Yeah," Jack agreed, though part of him wanted to keep her on the call, to lose himself in her voice and forget about the strange discomfort he felt about Karen's presence. "I love you." "I love you too," Agneta replied. "Dream about me." "Always do," Jack said. And it was true. But that night, for the first time since Agneta had left, Jack didn't dream about his wife. Instead, he found himself thinking about Karen's words about distance and loneliness, about how empty their house felt despite her presence, about how 5 months suddenly seemed like an impossibly long time to wait. In Melbourne, Agneta hung up the phone with a strange feeling in her chest she couldn't name. Something had felt different about Jack tonight, distant in a way that had nothing to do with the thousands of miles between them. But she pushed the feeling aside, telling herself she was being paranoid. Jack loved her. They had promised to wait for each other, to stay strong despite the distance. Nothing was going to change. She had no way of knowing that change had already begun, creeping into her marriage like poison in darkness, carried by a woman she trusted completely and wearing the mask of friendship and concern. The seeds of betrayal had been planted, and in the lonely soil of separation, they were already beginning to grow. Chapter 6. The slow poison betrayal rarely announces itself with fanfare. It creeps in quietly, wearing friendship's mask and speaking concern's language, until one day you wake up and realize the person you trusted most has been systematically destroying everything you held sacred. By the 3rd month of Agneta's treatment, Karen Abrams had woven herself into Jack and Agneta's life with the skill of someone who'd been planning this moment for years. She'd extended her vacation twice, claiming her New York job was flexible and Jack clearly needed support. What had started as a few weeks of helping had become something feeling increasingly permanent. She'd transformed the guest room into a personal sanctuary. Fresh flowers, scented candles, photographs of herself and Agneta from college that somehow made her presence seem more legitimate. She'd established routines revolving around Jack's schedule, coffee ready when he woke, elaborate dinners waiting when he returned home exhausted and emotionally drained. "You've been working too hard," Karen observed one evening, watching Jack push food around his plate without eating. "Agneta wouldn't want you wearing yourself out like this." Jack looked up, surprised by her directness. "I'm fine." "No, you're not," Karen replied gently, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "You're exhausted, stressed, and lonely. There's no shame in admitting that." The touch lasted just a moment too long to be purely friendly, but Jack was too tired to analyze it. He'd been working 18-hour days, partly because deadlines demanded it, and partly because staying busy kept him from thinking about how much he missed Agneta. "I just want everything perfect for when she comes home," Jack said, pulling his hand away. "The business needs to be stable, the house needs to be ready." But what good will any of that be if you collapse from exhaustion before Agneta returns? Jack knew she was right, but admitting it felt like admitting weakness. He'd promised Agneta everything would be fine while she was gone. "Maybe I should call her," Jack said. "You just talked this morning," Karen pointed out, "and she has enough to worry about with treatment. She doesn't need stress about you, too." There was logic in Karen's words, but something felt wrong to Jack. Since when did he need permission to call his own wife? But Jack was too exhausted to argue, and Karen had already moved on to asking about his weekend plans. "Actually," Karen mentioned, as if the thought had just occurred, "there's a new art gallery opening downtown Saturday. You love art, and it might be good to get out of the house." "I don't really feel like... When's the last time you did something just for fun? Agneta would want you to have some kind of social life while she's gone." The mention of Agneta's wishes was becoming a frequent refrain in Karen's suggestions, and Jack was beginning to notice how often she claimed to know what his wife would want. "I suppose it couldn't hurt," Jack said reluctantly. That Saturday, Jack found himself in a crowded gallery, nursing wine and wondering how he'd let Karen talk him into this. The art was pretentious, the crowd was loud, and all he really wanted was to go home and video call Agneta. "You're not enjoying yourself," Karen observed, appearing at his elbow in a dress just a little too fitted, a little too revealing for a casual outing between friends. "It's not really my scene," Jack admitted. "I know," Karen said sympathetically. "You're more of a quiet evening at home type. I remember from college, you always preferred intimate gatherings with people you actually cared about." Jack looked at her in surprise. "You remember that?" "I remember a lot about you," Karen said softly, green eyes meeting his with intensity that made him uncomfortable. "I probably paid more attention than I should have back then." "What do you mean?" Karen looked away, as if she'd said more than intended. "Just, you were always different from other guys we knew, more thoughtful, more genuine." They stood in awkward silence. Finally, Karen spoke again. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you'd made different choices?" "What kind of different choices?" Jack asked, though something in his chest tightened. "Career choices, relationship choices, just different choices." Jack felt a flash of anger. "I'm happy with the choices I've made." "Of course you are," Karen said quickly. "I just meant you've sacrificed a lot for love. Your family, your inheritance, the life you were supposed to have. Most people wouldn't be strong enough to give up that much." "I didn't give up anything that mattered," Jack said firmly. "That's what makes you so incredible. But it must be hard sometimes, especially now with Agneta so far away, to not wonder about the road not taken." Jack stared at a painting in front of him, swirls of blues and greys resembling a storm at sea. "I should go home," he said abruptly. During the ride home, Karen kept up steady chatter, but Jack could feel her words working on him like acid, eating away at certainties he'd never questioned. Had he sacrificed too much? Would his life have been easier if he'd married someone from his own background? When they reached the house, Karen suggested a nightcap, and Jack found himself agreeing, despite knowing he should just go to bed. They sat in the living room he'd shared with Agneta for 3 years, drinking wine. "You know," Karen said, curling up on the couch's opposite end, "I always wondered why you chose Agneta." Jack's grip tightened on his wine glass. "What do you mean?" "Don't get me wrong," Karen said quickly. "She's wonderful and I love her dearly. But you could have had anyone. You're handsome, successful, from a good family. You could have had your pick of women who would have made your life so much easier." "I didn't want easy," Jack said, his voice warning her to drop the subject. "No, of course not," Karen agreed. "You wanted real. You wanted passion. I respect that so much about you, Jack. Most men would have taken the convenient option." She leaned forward, eyes earnest and admiring. You're not like most men. Jack stood abruptly, setting down his wine glass. I should get some sleep. Of course, Karen said. Jack? He paused at the doorway. Yeah. Thank you for tonight. It was nice to spend time with someone who actually understands me. Over the following weeks, Karen's campaign intensified. She made casual comments about how different he seemed, how isolated he'd become. You never laugh anymore, she observed one evening. I remember you having such a great sense of humor in college. I guess I don't have much to laugh about these days, Jack replied tiredly. That's exactly what I mean, Karen said. You used to find joy in small things. When was the last time you did something just because it made you happy? Jack couldn't remember, and that realization was more disturbing than he cared to admit. Karen was also subtly undermining his connection with Agneta. When Agneta called during dinner, Karen would suggest Jack call back later. When Jack wanted to send flowers, Karen would point out how expensive international shipping was. She's focused on getting better, Karen would say. She doesn't need distractions right now. Slowly, Jack's conversations with Agneta became shorter and less frequent. When she asked what he'd been doing, he found himself editing out Karen's presence, partly because he couldn't explain why his wife's best friend was still living in their house after 3 months. The lies started small, omissions rather than outright deceptions. But each small lie made the next easier, until Jack found himself living a double life, the devoted husband on the phone with his wife, and the lonely man being comforted by her beautiful best friend. You look tired, Karen said one night, studying his face across the dinner table. You're working too hard. I'm fine, Jack replied automatically. No, you're not, Karen said firmly. You're exhausted and stressed and pretending everything is okay when it's not. Before he could respond, she was standing behind him, hands settling on his shoulders. You're all knotted up, she said softly, beginning to massage tension from his neck and shoulders. Jack knew he should tell her to stop, should move away from her touch. But it had been so long since anyone had touched him with care, so long since he'd felt human contact that wasn't purely professional. Agneta had been gone for 4 months, and Jack was beginning to understand how physical isolation could wear away at a person's resistance. Better? Karen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, Jack admitted, hating how much he meant it. That night, Jack lay in his empty bed staring at the ceiling, Karen's touch still burning on his skin. He tried calling Agneta, desperate to hear her voice, but it was 3 a.m. in Melbourne, and her phone went straight to voicemail. I miss you, he whispered to her recorded greeting. I miss you so much it feels like dying. But even as he said the words, he could hear Karen moving around in the guest room down the hall, and he found himself wondering what she was thinking about, whether she was as lonely as he was. The thought terrified him. In Melbourne, Agneta was beginning to sense something was wrong. Jack's calls were becoming perfunctory, their conversations stilted. When she asked about his day, his answers were vague. Are you okay? She asked during one video call, studying his face on her laptop screen. You seem different lately. I'm fine, Jack said, but wouldn't quite meet her eyes through the camera. Just tired from work. Maybe you should take a vacation when I get home, Agneta suggested. We could go somewhere together. Yeah, Jack agreed, but without enthusiasm. Maybe. After they hung up, Agneta sat staring at her reflection in the dark laptop screen. Something was wrong with her husband, and she was thousands of miles away, with no way to fix it. She tried calling Karen, but when Karen finally called back hours later, she was full of reassurances. He's fine, honey, Karen said warmly, just working too hard, like always. He seems so distant lately, Agneta confessed. He misses you, Karen said simply, but he's handling everything beautifully. You should be proud of him. The reassurance should have comforted Agneta, but something in Karen's tone set her nerves on edge. There was something too smooth about her words, too quick and confident. But Agneta pushed her suspicions aside. Karen was her best friend, the one person she trusted completely to look after the man she loved. She had no way of knowing that at that very moment, Jack and Karen were sharing wine in the living room she'd decorated, that Karen was wearing a dress too revealing for a casual evening at home, that she was sitting closer to Jack on the couch than friendship warranted. She had no way of knowing that her husband was fighting a battle he wasn't sure he wanted to win anymore, against a woman who'd been planning his seduction for years and knew exactly how to exploit his loneliness, his doubts, and his growing resentment of the sacrifice he'd made for love. The poison was working. Soon, it would complete its deadly course, and everything Agneta thought she knew about her life would crumble into ash. Chapter 7. The text that destroyed everything. There are moments that divide a life into before and after, moments when everything you believed about love, loyalty, and the person you trusted most shatters like glass, leaving you bleeding among the fragments of what used to be your beautiful, certain world. The Melbourne sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose as Agneta packed her final belongings into the suitcase that had been her companion for 5 months. Treatment had been successful. Better than successful, actually. Dr. Chen had declared her completely cured that morning, with follow-up care requiring only quarterly check-ins at home. Home. The word sang in her heart like an answered prayer. In less than 24 hours, she'd be back in Jack's arms, back in their house with its garden of flowers and memories, back to the life they'd built together with such love and determination. She'd wanted to surprise him. Treatment had finished a week earlier than expected, and instead of calling to share the good news, she'd decided to show up unannounced. She could picture his face when she walked through their front door, shock giving way to joy, the way he'd sweep her into his arms and spin her around their kitchen just like the night he proposed. The past 5 months had been the longest of her life. Treatment itself had been grueling. Hours of therapy sessions, experimental medications, leaving her nauseated and exhausted, constant uncertainty about whether protocols would work. But physical challenges had been nothing compared to the emotional toll of separation from Jack. Something had changed between them over the past 2 months, though Agneta couldn't identify what. Their conversations had become shorter, more distant. Jack seemed distracted, stressed in a way going beyond his usual work pressures. When she asked about it, he assured her everything was fine, but his reassurances felt hollow. Even Karen had seemed different during recent calls, less chatty, more evasive, when Agneta asked how Jack was doing. She'd stopped visiting him regularly, claiming her New York work was demanding all her attention. But all of that would be sorted once Agneta was home. Whatever was troubling Jack, whatever was creating this distance between them, could be fixed. They'd overcome worse challenges before. Their love was strong enough to weather any storm. She pulled out her phone to text the family group chat Jack had created years ago. It included both their immediate families, though Jack's parents had never actually participated in conversations. It would be the perfect way to announce her early return without spoiling the surprise for Jack specifically. Her fingers trembled slightly with excitement as she typed, "Flight lands at 5 p.m. Can someone pick me up?" She hit send and immediately began imagining responses. Her mother would probably send heart emojis and exclamation points. Jack would likely see the message within minutes. He always kept his phone close during work hours in case she needed to reach him. Maybe he'd arranged to leave work early, or ask friends to cover so he could surprise her at the airport. Her phone buzzed with a response faster than expected. Jack's name appeared on the screen, and Agneta felt her heart leap with anticipation. She opened the message, already smiling at whatever sweet thing he was about to say. The words on the screen didn't make sense at first. Agneta read them once, twice, 3 times, her brain refusing to process their meaning. "Don't come back. I'm with Karen now." The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor of her small Melbourne apartment. The words burned in her mind like acid, impossible and yet undeniably real. She picked up the phone with shaking hands, certain she'd misread, certain this was some horrible mistake. But the message was still there, sent from Jack's number to the family group chat, where everyone would see it, including her mother, including her aunts and uncles, including anyone who'd supported their love story from the beginning. A second message appeared. "Karen and I are together. We're in love. Don't contact us again." The room began spinning around Agneta. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't make sense of what she was reading. Jack, her Jack, who'd cried when he first saw her in her wedding dress, who'd given up everything to be with her, was with someone else, was with Karen, her best friend, her maid of honor, the woman she'd trusted to look after him while she was gone. With trembling fingers, she called Jack's number. The call went straight to voicemail, his familiar voice telling her he couldn't come to the phone right now, but would call back soon. The normalcy of the message was somehow more devastating than if he'd changed it entirely. She tried Karen's number. Also, straight to voicemail. Agneta sat on the edge of her narrow bed in her Melbourne apartment, staring at the phone in her hands, and felt something inside her chest crack open like an earthquake. The pain was physical, radiating from her heart through her entire body until she couldn't tell where emotional agony ended and physical suffering began. For 5 months, she'd endured painful treatments, lonely nights, and homesickness that felt like constant ache. She'd done it all because she knew Jack was waiting, because their love was worth any sacrifice, because she had a future to return to. And now that future was gone, destroyed by the two people she'd trusted most in the world. Her phone rang, and for one wild moment she thought it might be Jack, calling to tell her it was all a mistake, a cruel joke, anything other than the truth. But it was her mother's number on the screen. Agneta. Her mother's voice was thick with shock and hurt. "Baby, what is happening? I saw the messages in the group chat." "I don't know," Agneta whispered, surprised by how calm her own voice sounded. "I don't know what's happening." "Come home," her mother said immediately. "Not to him, to me. Come to Georgia. Let me take care of you." "I can't," Agneta said, still staring at Jack's messages on her phone. I need to understand." "Agneta, honey, you don't need to understand anything. You need to come where people love you." But Agneta was barely listening. Her mind was racing, trying to piece together the timeline. When had this happened? How long had Jack and Karen been together? Had their entire relationship been a lie, or was this something that developed while she was gone? She thought about Karen's extended stay in their hometown, her vague explanations about work flexibility, her increasingly evasive answers when Agneta asked about Jack. She thought about Jack's growing distance, his shorter phone calls, the way he'd seemed like a stranger during recent conversations. How long had they been lying to her? How long had they been together while she was fighting for her health, fighting to get better so she could come home to a husband who was already planning to replace her? Another message appeared in the group chat, this one from a number she didn't recognize. "This is Karen. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but Jack and I couldn't fight our feelings anymore. We never meant for this to happen, but sometimes love can't be controlled. I hope someday you can be happy for us." Agneta stared at the message until the words blurred together. Karen, her best friend since freshman year, who'd held her hair while she was sick during college, who'd helped plan her wedding, who'd stood beside her as she promised to love Jack forever, was apologizing for stealing her husband like it was an unfortunate accident rather than deliberate betrayal. The rage that swept through Agneta was unlike anything she'd ever felt. It was clean and cold and clarifying, burning away shock and confusion until only fury remained. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to beg. She wasn't going to collapse in her Melbourne apartment and let them destroy her. Instead, she began to plan. Her first call was to a private investigator she found through online search, someone specializing in infidelity cases who could work quickly. Her second call was to her bank, where she discovered Jack had not only cleaned out their joint savings account, but had also taken out a substantial loan against their house. Her third call was to a lawyer. "Mrs. Matthew," the attorney said after Agneta explained her situation, "I need to be direct with you. If your husband has moved assets without your consent and begun a relationship with another woman while still legally married to you, there are serious legal implications. This isn't just infidelity, this is potentially fraud." "I want to know everything," Agneta said, her voice steady and cold. "Every transaction, every decision, every lie. I want to know exactly what they've done and how to make them pay for it." She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat at her small desk with her laptop open, researching everything she could about Jack's business, his assets, his family's company that had disowned him years ago, but might still be relevant to his current situation. She researched Karen's background, her job, her finances, her social media presence. What she found was enlightening. Karen had been posting photos from Agneta's hometown for weeks, pictures at restaurants Agneta recognized, scenic shots from places she and Jack used to go together. In several recent photos, Karen was wearing clothes that looked expensive, far beyond what her marketing salary should have afforded. In one picture, she was wearing a bracelet Agneta recognized as one Jack had given her for their second anniversary. The private investigator called back within hours with preliminary findings that made Agneta's blood run cold. Jack and Karen had been together for months. Evidence suggested their relationship had begun almost immediately after Karen moved into their house, less than 2 weeks after Agneta left for treatment. While Agneta had been undergoing painful procedures to save her health, Jack had been falling into bed with her best friend. While she'd been calling him every day to check on his well-being, he'd been planning a future with another woman. While she'd been counting down days until she could come home to him, he'd been living with her replacement. The betrayal was complete and devastating, but instead of breaking her, it forged her into something harder, stronger, more dangerous than she'd ever been before. Agneta cancelled her flight home and booked a room at Melbourne's most expensive hotel. She wasn't going back as the broken, betrayed wife who'd been discarded for a newer model. She was going back as something else entirely. As she sat in the marble-appointed lobby of the Grand Hyatt, sipping champagne and planning her return to a life that no longer existed, Agneta felt a strange sense of liberation. Jack and Karen had taken everything from her: her marriage, her home, her best friend, her faith in love itself. But in taking everything, they'd also freed her from the constraints of being the good wife, the loyal friend, the woman who played by the rules and expected others to do the same. They'd created something new in her, something that didn't believe in mercy or forgiveness or the fundamental goodness of people. They'd created their own destruction, though they didn't know it yet. Agneta raised her champagne glass in a silent toast to the woman she used to be. Naive, trusting, believing in happily ever after. That woman was dead, destroyed by a text message that had taken everything she loved and twisted it into a weapon. What would rise from those ashes would be something Jack and Karen had never seen before, something they wouldn't recognize until it was far too late to run. The Queen was coming home, and she was bringing justice with her. Chapter 8. The Queen's Return. Hell hath no fury like a woman betrayed, but true power lies not in the fury itself. It lies in the ice-cold calculation that comes after the fire burns out, leaving behind something infinitely more dangerous than rage. A brilliant mind with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The first-class cabin of the Qantas flight from Melbourne to Los Angeles was nearly empty at 2 a.m., giving Agneta the privacy she needed to transform herself from the devastated wife she'd been 48 hours ago into the weapon she was becoming. She'd spent those 48 hours in her hotel suite, methodically researching every aspect of Jack and Karen's betrayal, while her team of investigators, lawyers, and financial advisors worked around the clock to build her arsenal. The woman boarding this plane bore little resemblance to the one who'd left for treatment 5 months ago. That woman had worn modest clothes and simple jewelry, had smiled easily and trusted completely. This woman wore a tailored black suit costing more than most people's monthly salary, carried herself with the dangerous grace of someone who'd learned exactly how much power money could buy, and smiled like a predator who'd just caught prey's scent. Agneta had liquidated everything. Her treatment had been covered by insurance, and her medical savings account had grown substantially due to careful investments during her time away. More importantly, her investigation had revealed Jack's hasty asset transfers had been illegal in several jurisdictions, giving her grounds to freeze accounts and challenge transactions that had stolen her money to fund his new life with Karen. But money was only part of her plan. Information was the real currency of revenge, and Agneta had purchased a fortune's worth. She knew Jack had mortgaged their house, the house they'd bought together with her name on the deed, to fund his development projects without her consent. She knew Karen had quit her job in New York and was living off money stolen from Agneta's own accounts. She knew Jack's family, who'd disowned him for marrying a black woman, had welcomed Karen with open arms and were discussing bringing Jack back into the family business. Most importantly, she knew neither Jack nor Karen had any idea what was coming for them. The plane touched down in Los Angeles at 6 a.m. Pacific time. Agneta didn't go home. There was no home to go to anymore. Instead, she checked into the penthouse suite of the Beverly Hills Hotel and began making calls. Her first call was to David Chen, Jack's former best man, who'd built a successful real estate empire on the West Coast. David had stayed in touch with Agneta throughout their marriage, and his reaction to her news was exactly what she'd hoped for. "That bastard," David said when Agneta finished explaining the situation. "Agneta, I am so sorry, and with Karen, I never trusted that woman." "I need your help, David," Agneta said without preamble. "Jack's company is vulnerable right now. He's overextended on several projects, and his cash flow is dependent on contracts that could disappear if the right pressure was applied. You want me to destroy his business?" "I want justice," Agneta corrected. "Jack stole from me to fund his new life with my best friend. He used my money to court another woman while I was fighting for my health. He deserves to lose everything just like I did." "Consider it done," David said grimly. "I have contacts in your area who owe me favors. Jack's company won't survive the month." Her second call was to Margaret Whitfield, a private investigator specializing in corporate espionage, who had a reputation for being both brilliant and completely without scruples. "I need everything," Agneta told her. "Financial records, communication logs, travel receipts, hotel records, photographs. I want to know every detail of their relationship, every lie they told, every dollar they stole." "That kind of investigation is expensive," Margaret warned. "Money is no object," Agneta replied. She'd liquidated her entire life to fund this war. "I want them destroyed so completely they never recover." Her third call was to Jonathan Price, a lawyer who'd built his reputation representing scorned spouses in high-profile divorce cases. "Mrs. Matthew," Jonathan said after reviewing preliminary documents Agneta had sent, "this is one of the most clear-cut cases of marital fraud I've ever seen. Your husband has committed multiple felonies, and his new wife is an accomplice." "I don't want to destroy them in court," Agneta said calmly. "Courts are public, and public scandals can be survived. I want to destroy them in ways that are private, personal, and permanent." "What exactly are you looking for?" "Complete financial ruin, social ostracism, professional blacklisting. I want them to lose everything and have no way to rebuild." "That's comprehensive," Jonathan said carefully. "They took 5 years of my life and threw it away like garbage," Agneta said. "They stole my money, my home, and my trust. They made me question everything I believed about love and loyalty and human decency. Comprehensive doesn't begin to cover what they deserve." Over the next week, Agneta's team worked with military precision to dismantle the life Jack had built with Karen. She didn't return to her hometown immediately. Instead, she coordinated her assault from Los Angeles, using her distance to maintain the element of surprise. The first blow came when Jack's biggest client cancelled their contract, citing concerns about his company's financial stability. The client had been approached by David Chen, who'd presented a more attractive bid backed by investors Jack couldn't hope to match. The second blow came when Jack's bank called in the loan he'd taken against the house, demanding immediate payment due to irregularities in documentation. Those irregularities included the fact that one of the property owners, Agneta, had never consented to the loan and was challenging its validity. The third blow came when Karen discovered that her former employer in New York had blacklisted her industry-wide for abandoning her position without notice to pursue a married man. By the time Agneta finally returned to her hometown, 10 days after receiving Jack's devastating text, her former husband's world was already collapsing around him. She didn't go to the house they'd shared. Legally, she could have, since the mortgage fraud made Jack's ownership questionable, but she chose instead to check into the presidential suite of the Ritz-Carlton downtown. The suite was enormous, decorated in gold and cream, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city where she'd once been so happy. Agneta stood at those windows on her first night back, looking down at the lights below, and felt cold satisfaction settle in her chest. She was no longer the woman who'd been destroyed by a text message. She was something new, something powerful, something infinitely more dangerous than Jack and Karen could imagine. Her first public appearance was carefully calculated for maximum impact. She chose the Metropolitan Museum's annual charity gala, an event she and Jack had attended together for the past 3 years, where everyone in their social circle would be in attendance. Agneta arrived fashionably late, stepping out of a black Bentley in a gown that probably cost more than Jack's monthly mortgage payment. The dress was midnight blue silk, complementing her dark skin perfectly, cut to showcase her figure while maintaining elegant sophistication. Her jewelry was simple but expensive, diamond earrings catching light like stars, a platinum bracelet that whispered rather than shouted wealth. The reaction was immediate and electric. Conversation stopped as she walked through the ballroom, heads turning to follow her progress. She looked like money, like power, like someone who'd transcended ordinary concerns of ordinary people. "Agneta." The voice belonged to Sarah Mitchell, a woman she'd known through Jack's business connections. "My God, is that you? You look incredible." "Thank you," Agneta replied with a smile warm, but not quite reaching her eyes. "It's good to be back. We heard about Jack and Karen. I'm so sorry. No one knew what to say." "There's nothing to say," Agneta replied gracefully. "Sometimes people show you who they really are, and you have to decide whether to be grateful for the lesson or bitter about the cost. I choose gratitude." The words were perfectly calibrated, gracious enough to make Agneta look like the mature, wronged party, while subtly implying Jack and Karen were beneath her notice. As the evening progressed, Agneta worked the room like a seasoned politician, re-establishing connections strained by her absence and making new ones with people impressed by her apparent success. She spoke vaguely about new business ventures and exciting opportunities, letting people draw their own conclusions about where her obvious wealth had come from. She was particularly charming to Robert Henderson, Jack's biggest competitor, who'd been circling his failing projects like a vulture. "I've heard so much about your work," Agneta told him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Your approach to sustainable development is exactly what this city needs." "Thank you," Robert replied, clearly pleased by her attention. "I have to say, your husband had some interesting projects before his recent difficulties." "Jack is very talented," Agneta agreed neutrally. "I'm sure he'll land on his feet eventually." It was a masterful performance. She defended Jack just enough to appear loyal while making it clear she was distancing herself from his problems. The coup de grace came when she was approached by James Matthew, Jack's older brother, who'd been avoiding her for years due to the family's disapproval of their marriage. "Agneta," James said awkwardly, "you look, well, very well." "I am well, thank you," Agneta replied coolly. Adversity has a way of clarifying one's priorities. "About Jack," James began, then stopped, apparently unsure how to continue. "Jack made his choice," Agneta said simply, "and I've made mine. I wish him happiness with his new partner." The dismissal was elegant and complete. She wasn't angry, wasn't bitter, wasn't destroyed. She was simply done. Moving on to bigger and better things while Jack struggled with consequences of his decisions. By the time she left the gala, Agneta knew her message had been received and would be transmitted through their social circle within hours. She wasn't the devastated victim of Jack's betrayal. She was the successful woman who'd transcended it. The next morning, she began the final phase of her plan. She purchased the building that housed Jack's company headquarters, not through her own name, but through a shell corporation that would take weeks for him to trace back to her. She immediately tripled the rent and gave him 30 days to pay or vacate. She bought up contracts for 3 of his major suppliers, then cancelled Jack's accounts, citing concerns about his company's viability. She hired away his 2 best employees with offers they couldn't refuse, leaving him short-staffed just as his remaining projects reached critical phases. And she waited. Agneta knew Jack would eventually figure out who was behind his systematic destruction. When he did, she wanted to be ready for him. She wanted to watch his face when he realized the quiet, trusting woman he'd betrayed had become the architect of his downfall. She wanted to see him understand that he hadn't just lost a wife, he'd created an enemy who was smarter, richer, and infinitely more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The Queen had returned to her kingdom. Now it was time to remind everyone why queens were crowned, and what happened to those who tried to dethrone them. Chapter 9. The Web Titans. Revenge is an art form that requires patience, precision, and an understanding that the sweetest victories are those where your enemies destroy themselves. You simply provide the circumstances that make their self-destruction inevitable. Jack Matthew stood in what used to be his corner office, staring at the eviction notice that had been hand-delivered that morning. The building that had housed Matthew Development for 3 years, the building where he'd built his reputation and fortune, now belonged to someone else, someone who apparently thought his company was too much of a financial risk to remain as a tenant. In the space of 3 weeks, his world had systematically fallen apart. First, the Henderson Group had cancelled their biggest contract, citing concerns about project management that made no sense given their previously excellent relationship. Then, the bank had called in his mortgage, claiming irregularities in documentation that his lawyer assured him were technically correct but ethically questionable. His suppliers had dropped him one by one. His best employees had been poached by competitors offering salaries he couldn't match, and now he was being evicted from his own office. "Mr. Matthew?" His secretary, Linda, appeared in the doorway looking uncomfortable. She was one of only 3 employees left, and Jack suspected she was already looking for another job. "There's someone here to see you. She says it's about the building purchase." Jack's expression hardened. He'd been trying to find out who'd bought his building for days, but the sale had been handled through so many shell companies and legal intermediaries that tracing the actual buyer was proving impossible. "Send her in," he said, straightening his tie and trying to look like a man who wasn't watching his empire crumble around him. The woman who walked into his office was tall, elegant and completely unfamiliar. She wore a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than Jack made in a month, and her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon that emphasized her sharp cheekbones and intelligent eyes. "Mr. Matthew," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Victoria Sterling, representing the new owners of this building." Jack shook her hand warily. "Ms. Sterling, I assume you're here to discuss the lease terms." "Actually, I'm here to discuss your departure," Victoria replied with a smile both professional and utterly cold. "The new owners have decided that Matthew Development is not the kind of tenant they want in their property." "Based on what?" Jack demanded. "We've never been late on rent, never violated any terms of our lease." "Based on concerns about your company's financial stability and your personal conduct," Victoria interrupted smoothly. "The new owners prefer to work with businesses that demonstrate strong ethical standards." Jack felt heat rise in his chest. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "I think you know exactly what it means, Mr. Matthew." Victoria's voice remained pleasant, but her eyes were ice. "The new owners are aware of your recent relationship situation. They find it distasteful." "My personal life has nothing to do with my business, doesn't it?" Victoria tilted her head slightly. "You used joint marital assets to finance personal expenses while your wife was undergoing medical treatment. You mortgaged property belonging to both you and your spouse without her consent. You've committed fraud, Mr. Matthew. That makes you exactly the kind of tenant the new owners want to avoid." Jack's face went white. How could this stranger know details about his personal finances that even his own lawyer was still trying to untangle? "You have 30 days to vacate the premises," Victoria continued, placing a folder on his desk. "All the details are in there. Have a pleasant day." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Mr. Matthew, you might want to check your email. I believe there are some other matters requiring your immediate attention." After she left, Jack's hands shook as he opened his laptop. His inbox was flooded with messages, but 3 stood out immediately. The first was from his insurance company, cancelling his policies due to misrepresentation of assets. The second was from the IRS, announcing an audit of both his personal and business taxes for the past 3 years. The third was from his bank, freezing his accounts pending investigation into suspicious financial activity. "This can't be happening," Jack muttered, scrolling through email after email of cancellations, investigations, and demands for immediate payment. Someone was systematically destroying his life, and they were doing it with surgical precision. His phone buzzed with a text from Karen. "Emergency at home. Come now." Jack drove to the house, their house, the one he'd shared with Agneta for 3 years before everything went wrong, with a growing sense of dread. He found Karen in the kitchen, surrounded by opened envelopes and legal documents, her face streaked with tears. "Jack, thank God you're here," she said, rushing to him. "Look at this. Look at all of this." The documents were devastating. Foreclosure notices, legal challenges to their relationship on grounds of bigamy, demands for restitution of stolen assets. But the worst was a thick packet from a law firm representing A.E. Matthews in a fraud case that named both Jack and Karen as defendants. "A.E. Matthews," Jack said, his voice hollow. "That's Agneta. Agneta Esti Matthews." "She's suing us for everything," Karen said, her voice rising toward hysteria. "The house, the business, everything we've bought since we got together. She's claiming it was all purchased with money stolen from her." Jack sank into a chair, the full scope of his situation finally becoming clear. It was. Christ, Karen, it was her money. The account I transferred everything from, she had legal access to it because we never officially divorced. When I cleaned it out to pay for this house, for your ring, for everything, I was stealing from her. "You said you were divorced," Karen screamed. "You told me the papers were final." "I was going to file them," Jack said weakly. After she got back from Australia, I was going to ask for a quiet divorce and then we could make things legal. I never meant for it to happen this way. So, our relationship isn't even legal? Jack couldn't meet her eyes. Number, it's not. Karen stared at him in horror, then began laughing, a high, brittle sound that made Jack's skin crawl. I gave up my job, my apartment, my life in New York for a relationship that doesn't exist. I'm now being sued for fraud because I trusted you. My face is going to be all over the papers as a homewrecker and a thief. Before Jack could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed his brother James's name. Jack. James's voice was cold and formal. I'm calling to inform you that the family has voted. You're out. Permanently. The board met this morning and decided that your recent conduct makes you unsuitable for any future involvement with Matthew Industries. James, please, the scandal is already affecting our stock price, James continued. Mother is in the hospital with stress-related complications. Father has had to hire a PR firm to manage the damage to our reputation. We can't afford to have you associated with the Matthew name anymore. I'm your brother. You were my brother, James corrected. Now you're just a liability. Don't contact us again. The line went dead. Jack stared at his phone, then at Karen, who was still surrounded by legal documents that would destroy both their lives. I need to find her, Jack said suddenly. I need to find Agneta and explain— Explain what? Karen shrieked. That you lied to everyone, that you destroyed her life and then destroyed mine, that you're a fraud and a bigamist and a thief. But Jack was already grabbing his car keys. He had to find Agneta, had to make her understand that he'd never meant for any of this to happen. He'd been lonely and confused, and Karen had been there, offering comfort when everything felt impossible. It hadn't been about love, it had been about weakness. He drove to every hotel in the city, but no one would confirm whether Agneta was staying there. Finally, at the Ritz-Carlton, the desk clerk informed him that Ms. Matthews was not receiving visitors. Please, Jack begged, just tell her I'm here. Tell her I need to explain. I'm sorry, sir. Ms. Matthews left specific instructions that you were not to be allowed access to her suite under any circumstances. Jack spent the next hour in the hotel lobby, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, but she never appeared. Finally, security approached him and politely but firmly escorted him from the building. Meanwhile, 43 floors above in her penthouse suite, Agneta watched through the window as Jack was led away. She felt nothing, no satisfaction, no pity, no lingering love. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his falling world. The man who had once commanded respect and admiration now appeared desperate and broken. Phase 1 complete, she said quietly to Margaret Whitfield, who was sitting across from her with a laptop full of evidence. The IRS audit will take months, Margaret reported. His business accounts are frozen, his suppliers have cut him off, and the foreclosure proceedings begin next week. Karen's situation is even worse. She's facing federal fraud charges, and her own family has disowned her. And the media? The story breaks tomorrow morning. Local developers' bigamy scandal rocks business community. I have sources at 3 major news outlets who are very interested in the financial fraud angle. Agneta nodded with satisfaction. Make sure they emphasize that I was the innocent victim fighting a serious illness while my husband stole from me to fund his affair with my best friend. I want public sympathy squarely on my side. Already handled. I've also arranged for several prominent women's rights organizations to issue statements supporting you. The narrative is clear. You're the wronged wife who fought back and won. That evening, Jack returned home to find Karen packing her bags with frantic energy. Where are you going? He asked, though part of him already knew. Back to New York, she said without looking at him. My lawyer says I need to cooperate with the investigation if I want to avoid federal prison. He thinks if I provide evidence against you, they might reduce my charges to a misdemeanor. Karen, don't. She finally met his eyes, and Jack saw nothing but contempt there. "I loved you, Jack, or I thought I did, but you used me just like you used her. The only difference is that she was smart enough to destroy you for it." She zipped up her suitcase and headed for the door. "You know what the really pathetic part is? Agneta was everything you said she was. Brilliant, beautiful, loyal. And you threw her away for someone like me, someone shallow enough to sleep with her best friend's husband. That's not—" "It is," Karen interrupted. "I always envied her, Jack. Her intelligence, her principles, the way she could make people love her without even trying. I thought if I could take you away from her, it would somehow make me as special as she was, but it just made me a thief and a liar." She paused at the door, looking back at him one last time. "I hope destroying her was worth it, because she's going to destroy both of us now, and we deserve it." After Karen left, Jack sat alone in the house that was about to be foreclosed upon, surrounded by the wreckage of his life. His business was gone, his family had disowned him, his partner had abandoned him, and his legal wife was systematically destroying everything he had left. The worst part was that he was beginning to remember why he'd fallen in love with Agneta in the first place. She had been brilliant, determined, and stronger than anyone had given her credit for. He'd been an idiot to think that betraying someone like that wouldn't have consequences. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Tomorrow, 8 p.m., Riverside Park, where you proposed. Come alone." Jack's heart raced. It had to be Agneta. Finally, she was willing to see him, to let him explain. Maybe there was still a chance to fix this, to make her understand that losing her had been the biggest mistake of his life. He had no idea that he was walking into the final scene of his own destruction, orchestrated by a woman who'd learned that the most devastating revenge wasn't the kind that destroyed you quickly. It was the kind that let you destroy yourself while she watched from the shadows, holding all the strings. Chapter 10. The Queen's Justice. True justice is not about punishment. It's about balance. It's about showing someone exactly who they really are, stripping away their illusions and excuses, and letting them face the consequences of their choices with perfect clarity. The evening mist clung to Riverside Park like a shroud as Jack Matthew made his way along the familiar path toward the bench where he'd proposed to Agneta 6 years ago. His hands trembled as he walked, partly from the autumn chill, but mostly from desperate hope that somehow he could convince the woman he'd destroyed to forgive him. She was already there when he arrived, sitting on their bench with perfect posture and hands folded in her lap. In the dim light of the park's antique street lamps, she looked like a queen holding court, elegant, untouchable, and infinitely more powerful than the woman he remembered. Agneta wore a black coat that probably cost more than his car, and her hair was styled in a sophisticated updo, emphasizing the sharp intelligence in her dark eyes. But it was her expression that stopped Jack cold. Not anger, not hurt, not even hatred. Just calm, clinical assessment, as if she were studying an interesting but ultimately insignificant specimen. "Hello, Jack," she said quietly. "Agneta." He moved toward her, then stopped when she held up one hand in a gesture both elegant and absolute. "Thank you for seeing me. I know you have every right to hate me, but I needed to explain—" "Explain what, exactly?" Agneta's voice was soft, but carried perfectly in the still air. "Explain how you convinced my best friend to betray me. Explain how you stole my money to finance your new relationship. Explain how you committed bigamy and fraud and threw away 5 years of marriage for a woman who's already abandoned you." Jack flinched as if she'd slapped him. "How did you know about Karen leaving?" Agneta smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Jack had ever seen. "I know everything, Jack. I know she's cooperating with prosecutors to reduce her own charges. I know your family has cut you off completely. I know your business is bankrupt and your accounts are frozen. I know you're about to lose the house you bought with my money." She stood gracefully, and Jack was struck by how poised she seemed, how completely in control. This wasn't the woman he'd left behind. This was someone else entirely, someone forged in fire and emerged as something harder and more dangerous than he could have imagined. "You want to know the really beautiful part?" Agneta continued, beginning to pace slowly around the bench. "You did most of it to yourself. All I did was provide a little acceleration to consequences that were already inevitable." "I don't understand." "Of course you don't," Agneta said, with something that might have been pity. "You never understood consequences, Jack. That's why you could throw away our marriage without considering what might happen next." She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive and unfamiliar that reminded him how much she'd changed. "Let me tell you a story," Agneta said conversationally. "Once upon a time there was a naive woman who thought love conquered all. She believed her husband when he promised to wait for her. She believed her best friend when she promised to take care of him. She was so trusting that when she got devastating news about her marriage via text message, her first instinct was to try to understand rather than seek revenge." Jack's throat constricted. "Agneta, please." "But that woman died the moment she read your message," Agneta continued, her voice never rising above conversational tone. "What replaced her was someone much more interesting. Someone who spent 48 hours learning everything about corporate sabotage, asset recovery, and systematic reputation destruction. Someone who discovered she was actually quite gifted at strategic warfare." She resumed her slow circle around him, and Jack felt like prey being stalked by a predator taking its time. "Your first mistake was stealing money I had legal access to," Agneta said. "Did you know joint accounts remain joint until divorce is finalized? Everything you spent on Karen, everything you used to set up your new life, you were stealing from me the entire time. I was going to file for divorce when you came back." "Your second mistake," Agneta continued as if he hadn't spoken, "was underestimating my intelligence. You always saw me as the literature professor, the idealistic teacher who couldn't possibly understand business or finance. You never realized that someone who can analyze Victorian novels' political intricacies might also understand corporate structure and financial manipulation." Jack felt sick. "What did you do?" "I bought your debts," Agneta said simply. "Your mortgage, your business loans, your suppliers' contracts. When you're facing financial difficulties, creditors are eager to sell your obligations to someone who can pay immediately. I now own every aspect of your financial life." The park seemed to spin around Jack. "That's impossible. The amounts involved would be impossible for a literature teacher," Agneta agreed, "but quite manageable for someone who liquidated 5 years of secret investments, called in favors from everyone who ever owed her husband a good turn, and partnered with competitors who'd been waiting years for Matthew development to show weakness." She stopped in front of him again, and Jack saw his own destruction reflected in her calm, dark eyes. "Your third mistake was assuming I would be devastated," Agneta said. "You thought I would cry and beg and eventually accept whatever scraps of settlement you were willing to offer. You never considered that I might become something more dangerous than a victim." "I never meant for any of this to happen," Jack said desperately. "I was lonely and confused, and Karen was there." "Stop." The single word cut through his explanation like a blade. "Don't insult our intelligence with that pathetic excuse. You weren't confused, Jack. You were selfish. You wanted comfort without the inconvenience of divorce proceedings. You wanted your new life while keeping me as backup in case it didn't work out." Jack opened his mouth to protest, but Agneta's expression stopped him cold. "You never filed for divorce, even after you started your relationship with Karen. You kept our marriage legally intact because some part of you knew you might need to come crawling back eventually." The truth hit Jack like a physical blow. She was right. Some part of him had always held back from making the break complete, had always left himself an escape route. The truly tragic part, Agneta continued, is that if you'd simply asked for a divorce, I would have given you one. If you'd been honest about falling out of love with me, I would have been heartbroken, but I would have survived. But you chose to lie, to steal, to betray me with my closest friend while I was fighting for my health. For the first time since she'd begun speaking, emotion crept into Agneta's voice, not anger or hurt, but something colder and more final. So I chose to show you exactly what those choices cost. Jack sank onto the bench where he'd once promised to love her forever. What happens now? Now? Agneta smiled again, and Jack realized this was truly the most terrifying expression he'd ever seen. Now you get to live with the consequences. You're bankrupt, unemployed, and facing criminal charges. Your family has disowned you, your business partners have abandoned you, and the woman you left me for has thrown you under the bus to save herself. She pulled a manila envelope from her coat and placed it beside him. Divorce papers, she explained. I'm granting you the divorce you should have asked for months ago. You'll find the terms quite generous, considering I'm not seeking alimony beyond what you've already cost me. I just want you legally out of my life. Jack stared at the envelope. Agneta, I know I have no right to ask, but— You're right, she interrupted. You have no right to ask for anything. But I'll tell you anyway. I'm leaving tomorrow for London, where I've accepted a position with an international education foundation. I'll be developing literacy programs for disadvantaged children worldwide, work that actually matters, funded by the settlement money from this disaster you created. She turned to leave, then paused. I want you to know something, Jack. 5 months ago, when you sent me that text, you broke my heart so completely I thought I might die. But you also freed me from the illusion that I needed you to be complete. You taught me that I'm strong enough to survive anything, smart enough to outmaneuver anyone who tries to destroy me, and powerful enough to build something beautiful from betrayal's ashes. Agneta's voice softened slightly, but her words remained absolute. So in a way, I should thank you. You destroyed the naive woman who thought love was enough to overcome any obstacle. What you created instead is someone who knows that love without respect is worthless, that trust without honesty is meaningless, and that some betrayals transform you into something stronger than you ever imagined. She began walking away, heels clicking on the stone path with finality's rhythm. Agneta, wait! Jack called desperately. I love you. I've always loved you. She stopped and turned back one last time, expression sad but resolute. No, Jack. You loved the idea of me. You loved having someone who adored you enough to overlook your flaws, who was grateful enough for your attention to never demand more than you wanted to give. But you never loved me enough to choose me when choosing me became difficult. Her next words were so quiet, Jack had to strain to hear them. I loved you enough to forgive anything, except betrayal with the person I trusted most. You chose the one thing I couldn't overlook, with the one person I couldn't forgive you for. That wasn't accident or confusion. That was cruelty. And cruelty, Jack, has consequences. As she walked away into the mist, leaving Jack alone with his divorce papers and the wreckage of his life, Agneta felt profound completion. She had loved him, lost him, been destroyed by him, and finally transcended him. The circle was complete. 6 months later, Agneta stood in the Dorchester Hotel's ballroom in London, accepting an award for her international literacy work. The foundation she'd joined had become an educational reform powerhouse under her leadership, and she'd been featured on magazine covers as one of the world's most influential educators. She wore midnight blue silk that made her look like royalty, and her smile was genuine, not the weapon it had been during her revenge months, but the expression of someone who'd found her true purpose. Meanwhile, In a one-bedroom apartment across the ocean, Jack Matthews sat at a second-hand table, filling out job applications for construction work. Karen had testified against him in exchange for probation. His family had legally changed their name to distance themselves from scandal, and he'd spent 6 months learning what it meant to live without money, connections, or hope. He'd kept one photograph from his former life, Agneta laughing in their garden, surrounded by flowers he used to bring her every Friday. Sometimes he stared at it, trying to remember what it felt like to be loved completely. But mostly, he tried not to think about her at all, because thinking about Agneta meant remembering that he'd held heaven in his hands and thrown it away for something worthless. The Queen had won. She'd taken her crown and built an empire worthy of her brilliance, while the man who'd tried to dethrone her learned that some victories come at prices too high for anyone to pay. Justice, it turned out, was a dish best served by letting people destroy themselves and then watching from a distance as they realized exactly what they'd lost.